If you are interested in learning more about the Magus class for Pathfinder 2e, or if you just really love Gish's spell swords, being effective and powerful both as a martial character and a spellcaster, then this episode is for you. Welcome to D4. Hi everybody. So here at D4, each week we take a deep dive into one, sometimes two, specific character builds for our favorite TTRPGs. We crunch numbers about them, we theorycraft about them, not so that I can tell you like the right way or the best way to build and play a character in your Pathfinder or D&D game, but to explore one potential way to build and play a character with the hopes of creating something that's both really powerful, but also, more importantly, really fun to play in game. So, if you enjoy creating characters for your role-playing games almost as much as you enjoy playing the actual game itself, or if you're just looking for tips or ideas on how to build a character that you're thinking about playing, then welcome home. This is where you belong, and I'm so glad you're here. I truly am. Thanks for being here. My name's Colby. Alright, so, as longtime viewers of this channel know, I love Gish's spell swords. Most of my most viewed videos are builds for Gish characters, especially D&D Bladesingers, right? There is something so infinitely alluring about being a martial character who can also cast spells. I was trying to explain what a Gish was to my wife the other day, actually, and after struggling for a while, she was like, so like a witcher? And I was like, yes, exactly like a witcher. Except for instead of just using like signs, they can cast more powerful and awesome spells like Yen or Triss. It is the ultimate have your cake and eat it too character concept. So as soon as I started diving into Pathfinder a couple of months ago and thinking about creating character builds for the system, after checking out the monk first, of course, the next thing I started to think about was, how could I build a really strong Gish in Pathfinder? None of these classes in the core rulebook seem to really lend themselves to the concept all that well. That, of course, is debatable. I might try to disprove that soon, but I digress. When I openly asked this question in a video, the overwhelming response was, Magus, build a Magus. Magus, you're gonna love the Magus. Magus! And I was like, cool, something to look forward to as soon as I get out of the core rulebook, which I'm not really ready to do yet. But then Ronald, the rules lawyer, asked me if I wanted to play in another Pathfinder game like I did before with him and some other YouTubers, but this time with DM Layer, Monkey DM, Blaine Simple, and Mr. Rex. And I was like, how can I say no to that? Those guys are awesome. So I signed up, and during our session 0, check it out here, everyone was talking about what they wanted to play, and it became obvious that no one was really volunteering to be a rogue-like character for scouting and lockpicking and trap disarming, and I love rogues, as you well know, and I kind of feel like having a character with that skill set is kind of important to any proper role-playing party. So I was like, I could play a rogue, but I already built a rogue, so I kind of want to do something else. And Ronald was like, you could play a Magus. They can be dex-based, and one of their subclasses anyway has like a really roguey feel to it, and I know you'd love it. And I was like, twist my arm. And so I had my excuse to abandon the core rulebook and jump into the Secrets of Magic book and learn all about the wonderful world of the Magus, and holy crap is it wonderful. But let me just say this, for this build that I'm doing today, I'm going to stick with just the core rulebook and the Secrets of Magic books. I own the Advanced Player's Guide, right there. But to date, I've only leafed through it. I'm just not ready to open up my character builds to everything yet, okay? So, right, here's the real appeal about playing a spellsword character, I think. It's being able to cast spells and make weapon attacks in combat, ideally at the same time, or at least one as often as the other, right? With the Bladesinger and the Hexblade and other similar subclasses in D&D, it's kind of like you can make weapon attacks, sure, and if you build for it, you can be a really great martial attacker, I would argue. But there's not generally a whole lot of spell casting that goes on regularly for you during combat. With those Gishes, you might throw out a strong spell to like buff yourself at the beginning of combat, a haste, a shadow blade, Shadow Blade, greater invisibility, and sure, you could cast spells if you really wanted or needed to instead of making weapon attacks. But aside from the Blade Singer, who eventually gets to cast a cantrip and make a weapon attack on the same turn, and let's be honest, that cantrip is usually used for, yeah, Booming Blade, which is basically just a glorified weapon attack. There's not a ton of spell in your spell sword. You're mostly just a sword with some spells to buff your sword. You know what I mean? Enter Pathfinder and the Magus. I mean, whether you love Paizo or not, one thing you've got to give them, man, they really nailed the concept of the Gish with this class. Because, see, the main thing that Maguses do, Magi? I think it's Magi, is this nifty little thing called Spell Strike. We'll get into it more in a bit, but essentially it lets you make a weapon attack and fuel that weapon attack with a spell. And sure, that might mean that your attack kind of just does some extra fire or lightning damage or something, which is plenty cool in and of itself. But it also might mean that you entangle the enemy with magical vines upon attacking them, or blind them, or banish them, or eventually that you hit them and then spray a cone of fire out as part of the attack to damage nearby enemies too, and it's just everything. I get a little choked up just thinking about it. Future game developers, please take note. This is what we want when we ask for a sword and sorcery character. We don't just want to be able to choose between casting spells or making weapon attacks. We want our freaking weapon attacks to cast spells. Yes. Yes, 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 yes. Now, a few notes before we get into the nitty-gritty. First off, I built my Magus for Ronald's game as a dex-based Gish, which is my favorite kind of character conceptually, but mostly because we needed someone who could be roguey, like I've said. After studying the mechanics of the Magus for many hours over the last few days, however, I've decided to build this version for the video today as a strength-based Gish, for a couple of reasons. One, my first two Pathfinder builds that I've done have been lithe and agile and nimble. I don't want to pigeonhole myself too much here. Also, the idea of a strong, solid, burly spell sword wearing medium or even maybe plate armor felt kind of unique and pretty cool. But then two, yeah, of course, I think the damage numbers are just slightly better with a strength-based build, and yes, I want to eke out as much damage out of this character as I possibly can because I'm a slave to the spreadsheet. So, for the build today, we're going with a strength-based Magus. Plus, going strength lets me be a lot less mad, multiple ability score dependent, and Magi are mad. Magi. So, yes, being less mad is more happy. Alright, preamble complete. I proudly present Pathfinder episode number 3, The Laughing Shadow Magus. Huge thanks to my good friend Randall Hampton for the fantastic artwork that he came up with for this character. I send him the concept every week and he never disappoints me with what he returns in the form of fantastic, vibrant, amazing art to match the concept. In case you didn't know, he's currently in the middle of a Kickstarter, Little Game Masters, which is a TTRPG designed to be played with kids. It's super family friendly. He's already reached his funding goal, so the project is greenlit. Go check it out, do yourself a favor, and give your kids or nieces or nephews the gift of role-playing. I'll put links in the video description on where to find that Kickstarter and how to follow Randall on social media if you'd like to. Before we jump into the build though, let me read you guys really quick the description for the character that the team over at dScryb has come up with, since they are again the sponsor for the video this week. The Magus is a conflux of metal and magic as they move through the battlefield, their steps heavy, greaves thudding like a heart's final palpitations. They carry their hand-and-a-half sword over their shoulder, the flat of the blade keening against the worn pauldron, earning the bastard in its name. A dozen fiends scatter, fleeing in all directions, each hoping they will not be the one pursued, the one to feel that sword's edge. Inexorable in their vocation, the Magus slides the sword off their shoulder in a languid lateral arc that rips a black void through this plane. Their next step takes them through time and space to reappear in front of a fleeing fiend. The Magus's mouth opens, pouring magic from that black ether into their blade. Symphonic susurrations of steel and spell mingle into a crackling slash of devastation that scythes through the air and armor to rend skin, pulp bone, and boil black blood. The first fiend is felled and the others fly all the faster for it. Another shuddering step, another tear in the fabric of our world, and another fiend faces annihilation, until a dozen corpses decorate the battlefield. For none could ever run fast enough, ever run far enough, to escape the preternatural reach of this Magus. Man, I wish I could write descriptions like that. For those of you who don't know, dScryb is a fantastic tool that players and GMs alike can use to get professionally written descriptions of almost anything you can imagine wanting a box text-like description of for your tabletop role-playing game. We're talking settings, characters, specific attacks, dialogue, spells, magic items, and so much more. If it hasn't already been written, you can even request that they create something for you with the right subscription level anyway. But even with a free account, you can get access to thousands and thousands of searchable descriptions in their massive library, which grows each and every day. And yes, as I often like to highlight for you guys, they do provide so much more than just those box text-like descriptions, including maps that are fully VTT compatible and include descriptions of both like the map in general as well as individual places within the map itself, like this new Forgotten Arena map, perfect for all of your gladiatorial encounters, or this gorgeous Victorian greenhouse. Check out those colors. Has a serious Little Shop of Horrors vibe, I'm thinking. This might be my new favorite. And of course, you can not only get your own character professionally described by dScryb, but they've partnered with professional artists who you can commission for an incredible looking portrait to go along with the fantastic description that they write, like this latest, Rustic Juwelier. I hope I pronounced that right, that they've been showing off lately. Looks like kind of a snow leopard tabaxi. Wow. Anyway, like I've said, so much of dScryb's content is available with a free account, but of course, to get access to everything, you're gonna want a hero subscription, which is only a few bucks a month, or even better now, a celestial subscription if you also want access to their amazing Sonic library. Go check them out at dScryb.com/d4. I'd appreciate it if you would use that link. That's how they know I sent you. I'll put that in the video description, of course, as always. And don't forget, if you decide to purchase a subscription, make sure you use the code D4 at checkout and you'll save 10%. Huge thanks as always to dScryb. You guys are amazing. And let's jump into the build. All right, so at level 1, yes, for our class we're going Magus. And as a Magus, we get to choose what we want our key ability score to be between strength and dexterity. Like I said, I'm gonna go strength. So no, this is not really like a Blade Singer character, dancing around in combat, weaving spells. This is a fully armed and armored magical panzer, and I am here for it. So yes, with strength as our key ability score, that means we get a bump up to 12 for strength. Now, as a Magus, we have trained proficiency in simple and martial weapons, nice, as well as light and medium armor, nice. As for our ancestry, if this were a dex-based Magus, I think I'd go elf like I did in Ronald's game, and coincidentally, if you want to kind of see the difference between what I build and what I played in that game, be sure to check out the Rules Lawyers channel and you can find the game there and see how I built and played it. But for our magic panzer, I think I want to do, yeah, human. The run of non-versatile human characters was fun while it lasted, yeah. We get a lot of nice things as human. First, we bump 2 ability scores of our choice, and I'd like to take Strength and Intelligence, putting them at 14 and 12 respectively, since Intelligence is like our spellcasting stat on a Magus, right? Then we get to choose our Heritage, our subrace, if you want to think of it that way, and yes, I want to take the Versatile Heritage, which gives us a free general feat. I do see this as fairly important to this character, actually, because I really want the Fleet feat. Say that 5 times fast. Fleet, feet, fleet, feet, feet. Nope, can't. Fleet gives us an extra 5 feet of move speed. Pretty simple. Humans have a 25-foot move speed typically, and bumping it up to 30 is kind of a big deal, as we'll discuss later. As for the ancestry feat that we get at level 1, I'd like to take Yes, Natural Ambition. This gives us a free class feat, and this feels especially important actually since Magi don't get a class feat at level 1. What? The audacity. So yeah, I want like almost every feat that a Magus can get, and I might have skipped over level 1 feats completely if not for this Natural Ambition, so I'm really happy to have it. As for the class feat that I want to take, I'm going to go with Magus's Analysis. Say that 5 times fast. I'm going to explain what Magus's Analysis does later because we need to understand Spell Strike first, and I haven't gotten there yet. So much to go over at level 1. So yes, as for our background, I feel pretty strongly about taking the Scholar background. It gives us a bump to our intelligence and then a free ability boost, and we take strength of course, giving us a 16 strength and a 14 intelligence. We also receive training in the occultism skill, which we haven't really talked about much on the channel yet. It doesn't really have much of a counterpart skill in D&D, I don't think, but being trained in the skill means we know a lot about ancient things, lore, mysticism, the supernatural, etc. We primarily want occultism for the recall knowledge ability, but we'll get into that in a minute. Scholar also gives us the Assurance skill feat, which, as you probably know by now, is one of my favorite skill feats, though I am learning that it's probably best used for a skill that we have a low ability score modifier for, since with Assurance, we pick a skill that we're trained in, and when we make checks for that skill, instead of rolling, we just automatically get a 10 plus our proficiency bonus, which means our level plus our bonus from training, and I want to take Assurance in the Deception skill, primarily so that we can feint at least semi-effectively, but as with a lot of things, we'll get to that more a bit later. We then get ability boosts, right? 4 abilities that we get to boost, and I want to bump Strength, taking it to an 18, Intelligence, taking it to a 16, and then Constitution and Wisdom, bumping them each to 12. This is really nice for our survivability, perception, and saving throws. Sorry, reflex saves. Sucks to be you. But don't worry, I've got a plan. For our final skill training then, as a Magus, we get training in the Arcana skill plus 2 more plus our intelligence modifier. So for us, that's going to mean 5 more skills on top of Arcana. And I want to take Athletics, Deception, as I've mentioned, Nature, Religion, and Society. I think Athletics is always good to have for jumping and climbing. Deception, we've already gone over, and the other ones I think are important to have if, again, we're going to be trying to recall knowledge, which we will be. Hold on, I'm almost there. As for our starting equipment, I want to start out with 2 really important things. First, I want to buy a bastard sword, because I just love saying the word bastard and not feeling guilty about it. But also because, I mean, come on, Jon Snow. There is no bastard sword in D&D 5e, and there totally should be. Hand and a half. I love this weapon because you can either use it with one hand, in which case it does a d8 of damage, just like a longsword would, or you can use it with 2 hands and have it do a d12 of damage, and I actually think we might be doing a little bit of both on this build. We'll talk about that later. I also want to make sure that we get chainmail armor. This is the best armor we can get for our defense. We could get a breastplate as well, I suppose, but they are more expensive and provide the same armor class benefit. Both give us a +4 to our AC and have a dexterity cap benefit of +1. Alas, our dex was just left at a 10, which means no bonus, but like I said, don't worry, I got plans. So with our strength of 18, we don't need to worry about any move speed or check penalty with either armor. All right, so now we get to talk about the best thing about Magi, the one and only Spell Strike ability that we get at level 1. This is just the coolest. Cooler than pee in your pants. Spell Strike takes 2 of our precious 3 actions to use each turn. When we use it, we make a weapon strike or unarmed attack and cast a spell at basically the same time. The spell we cast has to be one that requires a spell attack roll and has to be one that takes 1 or 2 actions to cast. It can't be a 3-action spell. It can be a cantrip or a spell that uses a spell slot. If our melee attack hits, it does damage as a normal strike would, but then also the spell hits the target too, just automatically. The range of this spell is essentially changed to the range of our weapon. If the spell also requires a saving throw, then the target gets to make a save. But yes, if the spell does more than just extra damage, then those effects also potentially apply. So yes, this means you could spell strike with Acid Splash, and the target would take the damage from the weapon, the damage from the spell, plus it would splash acid onto nearby targets, including us here if we only have a 5-foot reach, which we do, so watch out. Or if you used the Tanglefoot cantrip, it would wrap vines around them and then give them a -10 to their move speed if they failed their saving throw. This is so awesome. I love it with all of my heart. Now, one big challenge with Spell Strike is this. After the first time you use it, you have to recharge it to use it again, and recharging Spell Strike takes an action. Fortunately, there are things we can do that will automatically recharge it, but they are limited in use. We'll get into them later. One last thing about Spell Strike. It counts as 2 attacks when calculating our multi-attack penalty. So even though we're just making one big spell-infused strike with it, if we were to use our 3rd action on our turn to strike again, it would be at a -10 to hit penalty, or a -8 if we were using an agile weapon, right? And so yes, this means that Magi are very starved for actions, thanks to Spell Strike taking 2 and recharging it taking 1. So if we wanted to Spell Strike every single turn, we're not going to be able to, like, stride, right? So we're going to have to get creative around finding ways to stay in range of our enemies and recharge our Spell Strike if we want to use it as often as possible. Alright, now that we understand Spell Strike, I need to explain why we took Magus's analysis for our free class feat. I am really hoping to just be Spell Striking all the time, every turn if I can, but that means that I'm basically going to be using all 3 of my actions every turn to recharge Spell Strike and then Spell Strike. And that means that I'm not going to be bringing a whole lot to the party other than damage unless I'm Spell Striking with spells that debuff the enemy, I guess. And this is where Magus's analysis comes in. With Magus's analysis, you attempt a recall knowledge check about a creature. As a reminder, this is an action we can take to attempt to remember something about an enemy that we're fighting that, if successful, will give us some useful information about the enemy. Their weakest saving throw, for example, or if they have any damage resistances or weaknesses for that matter. This can be super useful for us and for our allies, so it helps me feel like I'm pulling my weight a little bit more with the rest of my team aside from just doing damage. And it's also why I wanted to take skill training in the skills that I did, because they are the ones that are most commonly used to recall knowledge against various creatures. The best part about this feat, though, is that if we are successful in our recall knowledge attempt, we automatically refresh our Spell Strike. So now we get to be useful to our party and do the thing that we want to be doing every single turn anyway. A couple of important notes. If you make a successful strike against the enemy this turn and then try to recall knowledge, you get a +1 circumstance bonus to your recall knowledge check. So maybe Spell Strike first in this case and then use Magus's analysis, right? But also, whether your check succeeds or fails, the target is immune to your further attempts to use Magus's analysis for a day. So you'll need to pick a different target if you want to keep doing this. And maybe most important to keep in mind, if your recall knowledge check fails here, then you don't recharge Spell Strike. So there's kind of a risk-reward aspect to it, which I'm totally fine with, but just make sure you're aware of how it works. The other cool and kind of important ability we get as a Magus at level 1 is the Arcane Cascade ability. This tells us that after we cast a spell or use Spell Strike, we can use an action to enter the Arcane Cascade stance. And while we are in this stance, our melee strikes do some extra damage. The damage type will match the damage type of the spell we cast just before entering Arcane Cascade, or if the spell we cast didn't do damage, will vary depending on the school the spell we cast it was from. This is really nice in that it allows us to potentially take advantage of enemy weaknesses to certain damage types and hopefully avoid enemy resistances as well. Now, we also get our Magus subclass here, our Hybrid Study, and even though we're building a strength-based character, which might feel a little counterintuitive to this subclass, yeah, I want to take the one that looks both the most fun to me and the most mobile and potentially the hardest hitting, the Laughing Shadow. With Laughing Shadow, we get a 5-foot move speed when we are in our Arcane Cascade stance. It's 10 feet if we're unarmored, but we won't be on this build, so it's just 5 feet, giving us a total of 35 feet of move speed, and that's pretty nice for a human. In addition, if we have a free hand while in Arcane Cascade and are attacking a flat-footed creature, instead of the usual 1 extra damage that Arcane Cascade normally grants, we do 3 extra damage. Not bad. Makes me wish I could attack a lot of times, but that's a different build. Anyway, we're happy with the extra damage and move speed, but I think the best part about Laughing Shadow might just be the Conflux spell that they get. See, each hybrid study gets a different Conflux spell, which is a focus spell that's unique to Magi. Conflux spells spend a focus point, like all focus spells, but when you use these specific focus spells, they have the very important added benefit of recharging our spell strike. And the Conflux spell that Laughing Shadows get is called Dimensional Assault. And this is something else that I just love with all of my heart. Dimensional Assault takes an action to use and essentially lets us teleport up to half our move speed to a square that puts us within reach of a creature. We then get to make a strike against that creature. Hello, Blink Strike. This is just such fantastic synergy for us since, like I said, if we wanted to spell strike every single turn, we wouldn't be able to both move, recharge our spell strike, and still have 2 actions left over to actually spell strike, at least not yet. Now we have something that we can use at least once per combat encounter to both get into position and recharge our spell strike, meaning that we can spell strike more consistently, and that's what we want to be doing. Also, this is why getting our move speed to at least 30 was really important, because if we were at 25 feet, we'd only be able to teleport 2 squares away, which would too often not be enough to get in range of another enemy, right? Now we can at least bamf 3 squares with a 30-foot move speed, and that feels pretty significant to me. As for the spells that we get as a Magus at level 1, this is where things can get a little bit rough. First of all, as a Magus, we get access to arcane spells only. Next, we need to understand how half-casters work in Pathfinder, and yeah, I'm gonna consider the Magus as a half-caster. To be frank, they're not treated particularly generously when it comes to spells, especially when it comes to spell slots. At first level, we get a spell book and learn 8 cantrips and 4 first level spells, but we only get to prepare 5 cantrips and only have a single first level spell slot. Yep, 1. What's more, as we level up, we never have more than 2 spell slots of any one spell level, and even worse, as we get higher level, our lower level spell slots just disappear. Yeah. It's rough. So at character level 5, for example, when we gain 2 third level spell slots, we lose our first level spell slots. So we only have 2 third level spell slots and 2 second level spell slots, and that's it. Now, we can still prepare first level spells at the heightened spell level and use those second and third level spell slots to cast them, right? But we have no first level spell slots. That kind of bums me out, but I do think it feels fairly balanced. Getting to cast spells and strike at the same time is wonderful, yes, but it does mean that, generally speaking, we're going to be relying almost exclusively on cantrips here for spell strike. At least when we're thinking about like our sustained damage per round, right? And fortunately, cantrips do scale a lot better in Pathfinder than they do in D&D, so at least that's comforting. As for the cantrips and spell we should prepare, I'm going to say that for now, we should try to get as much variety in our damage types as possible so we can potentially take advantage of enemy weakness and avoid enemy resistance. So let's go with Produce Flame, Ray of Frost, Acid Splash, Electric Arc, though that's not an attack roll cantrip and so couldn't be used with Spell Strike. It's still a really solid ranged option when you want to deal damage to 2 enemies, potentially. And finally, and most importantly, I think for this build, Gouging Claw. Gouging Claw is a spell found in the Secrets of Magic book, and I think it's the best spell we can use for spell striking when it comes to cantrips.
Supposedly, if you go Psychic for your archetype, you can get an even better one, but Psychics are from the Dark Archive book, and I don't even know what that is, so...
No Psychics. Nokapes. Gouging Claw typically has you turn one of your limbs into a clawed appendage and you make an attack with it. For us, if we're spell striking with it, it doesn't do that. Remember, it just channels the spell through our weapon, right? Our bastard sword. Maybe you can have the sword grow some claws or make a roaring lion sound when you swing it or something. I don't know. Have fun with it. But if you hit, you deal slashing or piercing damage, your choice, equal to 1d6 plus your spellcasting modifier, so 3 more. If you crit, you not only double the damage, but also add 1d4 persistent bleed damage, which is fantastic. As a reminder, it scales like all cantrips when you get access to a new spell level, so at spell levels 2, 3, 4, etc., or character levels 3, 5, and 7. Capiche? When it scales, it goes up by 1d6 for initial damage and another 1d4 for the bleed damage on a crit. When I crunch numbers, I'm pretty much going to be assuming that we're using this cantrip all of the time because I'm interested in knowing what our sustained DPR looks like, not necessarily our burst damage for this build. As for the first level spell, I think we should prepare. I think at this level it should be Magic Weapon. Magic Weapon is wonderful in that it makes your weapon a +1 striking weapon, which means that it gains +1 to hit and then increases the number of damage dice from your weapon to 2. So we'd now be doing 2d8 with our bastard sword when we were using it one-handed, right? It lasts for 1 minute. That's pretty fantastic for level 1 spell. Now, the bad news is that this wouldn't stack once you actually got a +1 striking weapon, and in Pathfinder I assume that that would happen relatively quickly. I think probably level 2 or 3 for most tables. So at that point we'd switch to something else, but for now it's probably the best thing we can get for our damage anyway. And that is level 1. Whew. I need a nap. At level 2, we get a Magus class feat, and I'm a little torn on this, but I think I'm gonna have to take Force Fang. I would so love to have expansive spell strike right here early on, but I really want to be able to spell strike as often as I possibly can, and if movement was separate from our actions in Pathfinder, that wouldn't be much of a problem, but assuming that all of our enemies don't just line up for us to be thrashed, we need to be able to use Dimensional Assault as often as we can, and that means we need more focus points. Force Fang is a conflux spell, so it gives us another focus point, so now we can potentially use Dimensional Assault twice in a combat encounter, though sadly, we only ever gain 1 focus point back when we refocus, right, or short rest between combat encounters. Still, we can never have enough focus points as far as I'm concerned. As for the Force Fang spell itself, it's not bad. You pick a target within reach of your melee attack, your weapon momentarily turns into a spike of pure force, and you just automatically do 1d4 + 1 force damage to the target. No attack roll needed, it wouldn't add to your multi-attack penalty or anything, so since it recharges your spell strike, you could conceivably use this to both recharge spell strike and do a little extra damage, whether before or after your spell strike, but I don't imagine using this all that often. We need those focus points to get around the battlefield. Maybe if you were fighting like a single enemy boss monster, right, who wasn't interested in moving around the battlefield much, I can see this being used, but otherwise, probably not. For what it's worth, Force Fang damage scales every 2 spell levels, so not until we'd be character level 5, and then it goes up by 1d4 + 1. Again, we're mostly here for the focus point. As for the skill feat that we get at level 2, I would want to take Arcane Sense. This basically lets us cast the Detect Magic cantrip at will, and that can be a nice bit of utility, and then keeps us from having to spend one of our precious 5 cantrip spots for it, so I like it. Also, at level 2, if we're playing with the free archetype variant rule, and we are, like the vast majority of Pathfinder players, check out this short here for more info on that if you want, then we get to take our archetype feat here, and at every even numbered level from here on out. And I think I want to go with the Wizard dedication. It really doesn't do a lot for our damage, but I think the thing this character would benefit from the most is more spell slots, and that's the main thing we would be getting from a wizard archetype. It's not going to be a ton of spell slots, but we have so few that any slots we can add are a big boon. When we take the Wizard Dedication, it lets us prepare 2 more cantrips each day, which is nice. I might look to take something with some utility or debuff like a Tanglefoot Strike or Message or maybe Warp Step, but I'm just going to say pick your favorites. We also get training in a skill of our choice since we're already trained in Arcana. That's what the Wizard Dedication would typically give us. So I'm thinking we go with crafting here. I think it's the only intelligence-based skill that we're not trained in yet, and it can potentially come up for Recall Knowledge, conceivably. Now, we do get to learn 2 new spells at every level as a Magus, and if you haven't learned them yet, I'd be sure to grab True Strike and Shocking Grasp. True Strike basically gives us advantage on our next attack, for those familiar with D&D. In other words, it lets us roll 2 d20s for our next attack that we make this turn and use the better roll. It only costs a single action, so if our spell strike is charged and ready to go, it can potentially be a decent use of a spell slot. That may sound surprising for those familiar with the True Strike spell in D&D, but remember, first off, advantage is not so easy to come by in Pathfinder. Also, because critical hits are generally easier to get in Pathfinder, especially on your first strike during your turn so that you're not suffering any multi-attack penalty, and because those critical hits hit so much harder, doubling all damage, not just dice, and we're kind of a one-hit wonder here on this character anyway, advantage is potentially even more valuable for us than it would be for other characters. Making that one hit as hard and as often as we can is a big deal. True Strike even lets us ignore any circumstance penalties to the attack roll, and even the flat check you have to make if the target is hidden or concealed. A good option to have up your sleeve. The other one I'd be sure to grab, if you haven't, is Shocking Grasp. I think it might be the best leveled spell we can get for just straight up single target damage, with maybe an exception or 2 depending on the level. I'm not building this character for burst damage, but this is our best just straight up burst damage option to use right now with Spell Strike, as the spell does 2d12 damage on a hit, and you get a +1 circumstance bonus to hit if they're wearing metal armor, plus 1d4 persistent electricity damage in that case, which should come up fairly frequently, I would think. It scales really well too, doing another d12 of damage for every spell level you heighten it, plus another 1 persistent damage to boot. Really nice. At level 3, we get another general feat, and I want to take Armor Proficiency. This is the plan that I keep alluding to. Since we're trained in medium armor, this would let us become trained in heavy armor, and that means we're getting plate mail. It's only 30 gold in Pathfinder, which means we couldn't have afforded it at level 1, but we should have plenty of cash by now to do so, I think. It's the best armor we can get, giving us a +6 to our AC. It allows for no bonus to our AC from dexterity, which we're totally fine with because we have a 10 dex. Now, it does give us a -5 penalty to our move speed. Even though we have the strength to wear it, we'll still suffer a -5 instead of a -10 like we otherwise would, right? But I don't mind that so much because we took both the Fleet feat and we get a 5 feet move speed bonus when we're in Arcane Cascade stance thanks to being a Laughing Shadow Magus, which means we're still at a 30 feet move speed, and thus when we use Dimensional Assault we can still teleport 15 feet, and that feels really important, so I'm happy. My favorite thing about plate mail, by the way, is that it has the Bulwark trait, which means that we get to add a +3 modifier to our reflex saves to avoid a damaging effect, like from a fireball, instead of our dexterity. And that's exactly what we need to not feel so bad about having a pretty lousy reflex save. We also get a skill increase at level 3, and I want to bump Deception to Expert. This may seem like an odd choice, but it will make more sense next level, so just hang on. Feel free to go Arcana here instead, or something else for that matter. At level 3, we get second level spells as well, and there are several that I would love to have, but the ones that feel the most interesting to me on this build are Blur, which is a nice self-buff spell, making us concealed for 1 minute, and remember that means an enemy has to make a flat DC 5 check when targeting us, and if they fail, they just miss, which means a 25% chance to just straight up miss us before they even roll their attack. And that will add up. The other spell I really love here is Telekinetic Maneuver. This spell requires an attack roll, meaning we can couple it with Spell Strike. If we hit, unless I'm mistaken, we just automatically disarm, shove, or trip the enemy we hit. That might be a hefty investment for a second level spell slot, but I think it just kind of demonstrates all of the amazing, awesome, and fun stuff we can get up to by coupling spells with an attack. So fun. At level 4, we get our next Magus class feat. Every time I say Magus, I feel like I'm saying haggis or maggots. It's a maggoty haggis. I want to take Distracting Spell Strike. Actually, I want to take 3 different things, but the one I'm taking is Distracting Spell Strike. It feels almost like an obligation since I'm a Laughing Shadow and it's only available to Laughing Shadows. Plus, it's potentially pretty good if you build for it, and we kinda have been, I think. It basically lets us get a free feint on our spell strike so long as we're in Arcane Cascade stance and have a free hand. When we spell strike, we automatically feint right before, weaving distracting magic first. It doesn't require an additional action to use. And this is why I wanted to take Assurance in Deception clear back at level 1, and why I bumped our Deception training to Expert first. Remember, with Assurance, we don't get to add any bonuses other than our proficiency, and then we just add a 10 to the proficiency. At level 4 then, our feint checks right now will be an automatic 18. That's pretty decent. It means you should automatically succeed at this level on feint checks against lower perception enemies at least. And considering that we don't even need to spend an action to do so, nor bump our charisma at all, that's kind of cool. It just automatically happens when we spell strike. I don't see this as strictly necessary for the build. In fact, when I crunch numbers for damage reports, I always just assume that we've got the enemy flat-footed, whether via flanking or something else. I appreciate that's not always going to be the case, but this at least gives us one more option to potentially get an enemy flat-footed. We get another skill feat here at level 4 too, and I want to take Recognize Spell. It seemed like a decent feat to get on this character. With Recognize Spell, you can use your reaction to try and recognize a spell that an enemy has cast, so long as you're trained in the appropriate skills for the spell's tradition. And since we're trained in Arcana, Nature, Religion, and Occultism, we're trained in every skill we need to potentially recognize any spell cast. Again, I don't see this as strictly necessary, like most skill feats, but it's potentially a handy tool, letting you help out your party as to how to deal with a spell, and even if you critically succeed on recognizing it, giving you a +1 to your AC and saving throw against the spell. As for the Wizard Archetype feat that we get at level 4, I want to take Basic Wizard Spellcasting, and this is actually the main reason I wanted to go Wizard Archetype. With Basic Wizard Spellcasting, we get additional spell slots. We get a first level spell slot for now, a second level spell slot at level 6, and a third level spell slot at level 8. Again, it's not much, but considering that we're about to completely lose all 2 of our first level spell slots next level, it feels nice to at least have one more to use for True Strike or Shocking Grasp or whatever. This also lets us add 2 more first level spells to our spellbook here, and I'm just going to say pick your favorites, PYF. At level 5, we get some ability score boosts. We'll take the same ones we've been taking all along: Strength, bumping it to a 19, Intelligence, bumping it to 18, which feels awesome, Constitution and Wisdom, bumping each to 14. We also get another Ancestry feat here, and I think I'm going to just take General Training to give us, yes, another general feat. Kind of feels like humans are just sort of always trading their feats for other kinds of feats, right? So bland, but potent. Anyway, I'd like to grab Toughness here, which gives us an additional hit point per character level, much appreciated. It also reduces the DC of recovery checks. These are your death saving throws, right? By 1. So it goes from an 11 to a 10, and it's Pathfinder. Every +1 matters. All Magi get Lightning Reflexes at level 5, which increases our reflex saves to Expert, finally. It was the only saving throw that wasn't at Expert level, and that's been a bit of a weak spot for us until now. Plate Armor has helped, but this helps even more. We also get Weapon Expertise here, which increases our training with our weapons and unarmed attacks to Expert level, so that's another +2 to hit now. Muy bueno. And we get a skill increase at this level as well. and I think I'd want to take Arcana to Expert here. Unless we think Recall Knowledge is more commonly used with another skill. I don't know, it's hard to say. Probably depends on the campaign. But then finally, at level 5, and maybe most importantly, we get 3rd level spells. Woohoo! Okay, so I'm gonna say you ought to grab Fireball. I mean, it's Fireball. No, you couldn't use it with Spell Strike, at least not in the moment, and even if you could, you might not want to because it would hit you too, but sometimes you just need to blow stuff up in a big, huge area, and having the ability to do so when you need it is kind of awesome. Other than that, I suppose the most important spell for us to take here will be Haste. Haste lasts for a minute and gives us the quickened condition, which essentially gives us an additional action at the start of each turn. That's kind of huge. I'm always complaining about how everything takes an action in Pathfinder and how we're always running out of actions. As I've talked about, that's especially true for a Magus, I think. Well, now we would get 4 actions per turn, and it's hard to overstate the power of that. Of course, the extra action we get can only be used to strike or stride, but that means we've largely solved the problem of not being able to recharge our spell strike, and move over to another enemy on our turn if need be. So, I think I'm going to change the point at which I do damage reports for my Pathfinder builds. First, I'm going to try to take all of them to level 10 for now. That might get higher as we get more comfortable with the system and I feel like I can start glossing over more stuff, but we'll shoot for 10 for the foreseeable future. With that in mind, I think it makes the most sense to do damage reports at 5 and 10, 15 and 20 if we ever get that far. Feels like a good place to stop and check the numbers since those are the levels we get ability score increases, for one thing, and it's just kind of nice and neat, 5, 10, 15, 20. So yes, I have adjusted the Ninja and Thief damage report numbers from level 6 down to level 5, and the Thief from 9 to 10, more on that in a second. As for the Magus, let's do our first damage report and talk about what combat is going to hopefully look like for us right now. On round 1, I think we generally want to be casting haste on ourselves, then entering Arcane Cascade. Yeah, setup rounds, kind of annoying, but these two both are fairly important buffs for us. After that, I'm going to assume that every round we are recharging our spell strike, whether via a conflux spell or Magus's analysis or just taking an action to do so, then getting a spell strike off and an ill-advised second attack, which would be made at a -10 to hit penalty. Ouch. This, of course, won't always be the case, but I think it will be more often than not. Remember, we have 2 focus points to use for Dimensional Assault, which will let us move and recharge Spell Strike. We can also potentially recall knowledge to recharge our Spell Strike, and we do have a 4th action that can be used to move or strike. So sure, there will be times when our Spell Strike hasn't been recharged, we're out of focus points, and we need to move to an enemy, but as always, I'm crunching numbers for best case scenarios, which yes, means that I'm assuming they're flat-footed as well. And to be honest, that second attack that I'm going to calculate for isn't going to do all that much damage. It's not going to move the needle all that much, numbers-wise, since it will so often miss. One last thing. Why a Bastard Sword? Here's the thing about Laughing Shadows, right? When you are in Arcane Cascade stance, you do extra damage if the enemy is flat-footed, above and beyond what Arcane Cascade usually grants. Problem is, it's not a ton more damage. So if the enemy is flat-footed, sure, we would now be doing 3 extra damage on a hit as opposed to 1. But if we were using 2 hands for our Bastard Sword, we would get a D12 instead of a D8. And that is 2.5 damage on average more. And even more if you get a critical hit, right? So the reality is that even if the enemy is flat-footed, if you can be making an attack with 2 hands, you're going to do a little bit more damage with that Bastard Sword than you would if you used 1 hand, despite the difference in the Arcane Cascade damage. Now, if the enemy is not already flat-footed, if we can't flank them, right, and we think we might be able to get that free feint off, depending on what their perception is, then we're going to be better off using 1 hand and thus successfully feinting and getting them flat-footed. But if we can't get them flat-footed, in that case we're much better off using 2 hands on the Bastard Sword, right? So when I crunch numbers, I'm going to assume that we're using our Bastard Sword two-handed for a d12 of damage. There will be times when you will only be using it one-handed and a d8. I love having the option, but again, exploring best case scenario, as always, we'll assume that we're using 2 hands here. Anyway, assuming a 2-handed grip and a flanked enemy, we would first spell strike with Gouging Claw, doing 2d12 for the weapon. Remember, we're using the automatic bonus progression in lieu of assuming magic items, which means we have a +1 to hit now, and an extra die for our weapon at this level. Plus 3d6 for Gouging Claw, which has scaled 2, plus 4 for our strength, 4 for our intelligence, and just 1 for Arcane Cascade. If we crit, the enemy takes 3d4 persistent bleed damage as well, thanks to Gouging Claw. With our final action then, we could conceivably make a weapon strike at a -10 to hit, doing 2d12 plus 4 for strength plus 1 for Arcane Cascade for a grand total of 4d12 plus 3d6 plus 18 if everything landed. And thus, against a low enemy armor class, which at this level would be a 19, we would on average do 53 damage per round. And against a high enemy armor class, which would be a 22 at this level, it would be 40 DPR. And okay, when you compare that to the adjusted numbers now for the ninja and the thief, that's actually lower than both of them, but it's basically the same as the ninja, and the thief is actually better than either of them now, which kind of surprised me, but it's because the ninja got a really big bump at 6 from Wolf Drag, and so when we took that away, it kind of brought them down. Anyway, you'll see it if you check the comparison spreadsheet in the video description, as always. So, I mean, the damage is fairly close. It's only a few points off for us compared to the thief. Maybe I shouldn't be so dismayed. After all, we have a lot more versatility thanks to our spellcasting ability than either of those 2 builds, and we also have a lot bigger potential for burst damage. If we were to use Shocking Grasp right now with a 3rd level spell slot on our spell strike instead of Gouging Claw, we'd do 25 to 30 more damage on average, depending on the enemy AC, right? That's pretty significant. That's a 50% increase even over the thief at this level. All right. Let's see where we can take it from here. At level 6, we get our next Magus feat, and I'm gonna take Expansive Spell Strike. I've been putting this off for way too long. I've been wanting to take it since level 2, and honestly, I might end up taking this at level 2 when I get there on my own Magus in-game. Expansive Spell Strike really opens up the number of spells we can use with Spell Strike and makes the Magus feel like even more of an exciting spell sword than before. If you recall, up to this point, we've only been able to use Spell Strike with spells that call for a spell attack roll, right? Expansive Spell Strike opens that up to spells that simply target a creature or that have an area of a burst, line, or cone. So yes, the fact that we can now do great single target damage to one enemy and potentially throw out a lightning bolt or burning hands or something as well just takes our gishiness to ludicrous mode, and it is the best ever. Just keep in mind, if you cast a spell with a burst area, the center of the burst is the target you've hit, meaning that we and possibly some of our allies will also be affected by the spell potentially. So I'd probably avoid hitting your enemy with a spell strike fireball, except for in very extreme circumstances. And yes, your target and any others affected by the spell will get to make saving throws against it as normal. We also get another skill feat here, and I think for skill feats from now on for the rest of the build, I'm just gonna say pick your favorite. Skill feats, more than anything in Pathfinder 2, I think tend to be more about fleshing out your character concept and feel less about actual mechanical power, with a few exceptions, and depending on the build. So go ahead and pick whatever feels important to your character here. This will probably become the norm for me most of the time for most builds, I think. As for our wizard archetype feat that we get here, I think I would take the basic Arcana feat to let us learn a 1st or 2nd level wizard class feat. And for that, I'm gonna take Familiar. Familiars are somewhat complicated in Pathfinder, and I don't think I have the time to get into the details here, so let me sum up. They don't just get to take the help action every turn like in D&D. You have to use one of your actions to have them do stuff. They're still really useful for scouting around, things like that, but they also can potentially get a lot of cool and helpful abilities. But you have to choose between like a list of things that they can do. Right now we get to choose 2 things for them to do, and my favorite thing to choose for them is the familiar focus ability, which lets you regain a spent focus point, but only once per day, unfortunately. I don't anticipate doing this in combat often, if ever, but outside of combat, it will be nice to get a second focus point back, even if it's just once per day, meaning more castings of Dimensional Assault during combat, and that's really important to keep us spell striking as often as possible. Don't forget, at this level we do get a second level spell slot from our basic wizard spellcasting archetype feat, which is much appreciated. At level 7, we get another general feat first off, and I want to take Incredible Initiative, which gives us a +2 bonus to our initiative, especially since we will typically be having a setup round. When we get into combat, I really want to go as early in the turn order as possible. For our skill increase at this level, now that we're level 7, we can bump a skill up to Master, and I think I want to go with Deception again up to Master now. That may seem crazy. If you're not using Feint with much success, then you might decide against this, but thanks to Assurance, we would now have an automatic 23 on our Feint checks, which, remember, we get to make for free if we're making attacks with our Bastard Sword with just one hand, right? Magi also get the Studious Spells feature, and we love this feature. It gives us 2 second level spell slots, which is great because at 7th level, we lose our Magus second level spell slots. We can only use these slots to prepare either Spider Climb, True Strike, Water Breathing, or as a Laughing Shadow, Mirror Image. We want to use them for True Strike. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go into what the other spells do, but you can probably guess. We also get Weapon Specialization at this level, giving us an additional +2 to damage with our weapons. Nice. Finally, at level 7, we get 4th level spells now. My favorite for a Magus is probably Chromatic Ray. When you hit with it, I'm assuming via Spell Strike, you roll a d4, and depending on what you roll, you fire a different colored ray that does different things. Red does fire damage, orange acid, yellow electricity, and green poison. They each do a different amount of damage, but on average, the spell's going to do a little more damage than Shocking Grasp would here at this level of spell slot. Though, again, results will vary depending on what color you get, but more than that, it's just fun and cool, and I like rainbows. Don't forget, now that we have Weapon Specialization, our Arcane Cascade damage goes up to 2 if we're using 2 hands on our Bastard Sword, right? 5 if we're only using 1 hand and the enemy's flat-footed, since we're a Laughing Shadow. At level 8, for our Magus feat, I think I want to take Runic Impression. This gives us the Runic Impression Conflux spell, but if I'm being honest, the main reason for doing this is to get a 3rd focus point for more Dimensional Assault uses. And remember, you can never have more than 3 focus points. But, I mean, the spell itself isn't horrible. It basically lets us add the benefits of a weapon rune to our weapon for 1 minute, which would let us add some elemental damage or make it more effective against incorporeal enemies, etc. I suppose I will add it to damage when I crunch numbers, assuming we use it to recharge our Spell Strike after the first time we use Spell Strike, adding then the Flaming Rune to our weapon, which will give it an extra d6 of fire damage plus a persistent d10 of fire damage on a critical hit. As for the skill feat that you get here, go ahead and PYF. And for the Wizard Archetype feat, I want to take Arcane Breadth. This is going to give us more spell slots, but it doesn't give us much. At this level, it basically gives us 1 more 1st level spell slot. You'll be glad when you can True Strike or Shocking Grasp 1 more time in a close fight. Trust me. We also get another 3rd level spell slot from basic wizard spellcasting, right, now that we're level 8, meaning that taking the wizard archetype has taken our total number of spell slots from 6, thanks to Studious Spells, to 10. That's a huge increase over what we would have had, and 10 spell slots feels like, okay, I can be using 2 or 3 spell slots in a combat encounter now, and that's pretty awesome. At level 9, we get alertness, and this increases our perception training to expert. And then we get another ancestry feat, and I think I want to take clever improviser as a human, finally not just taking another general feat. Oh wait, except clever improviser basically just gives us the untrained improvisation general feat, which essentially just lets us be better at skill checks that we're not trained in. It gives us some nice, like, jack of all trades utility. Also, with Clever Improviser, we can attempt skill actions that normally require us to be trained, even if we are untrained. We get the Expert Spellcaster feature here, and this just increases our proficiency ranks for all arcane attack rolls and DCs, yes, even those we gained from our Wizard archetype, to Expert. Very important. We then get Resolve, and this increases our will save proficiency to Master, and tells us that when we get a success on a will save, it's an automatic critical success. Fantastic. Then we do get a skill increase here at level 9, and I think I'm probably taking Arcana to Master to help out with those recall knowledge checks more than anything. And then finally at level 9, we also get 5th level spells and spell slots. And my favorite one here for this level, I think, is Cone of Cold. This is just perfect for that spell sword fantasy I've been talking about, because it does fireball-like damage, but in a massive cone. 60 feet, meaning you and your friends can stay safe from harm depending on where they're standing and how you aim it, while you blast your enemy and all their friends with 12d6 of cold damage when you hit one of them with a bastard sword, and it is glorious. And then finally, for us today, at level 10, first up, we get more ability score boosts. That's fantastic. That means we get our strength up to 20, our intelligence to 19, our constitution to 16, and our wisdom to 16. As for our level 10 Magus feat, I think I'd go with Dimensional Disappearance. This is only available to Laughing Shadows, and it tells us that when we cast Dimensional Assault, we become invisible at the end of the teleport. And that's just amazingly cool, even if it might not necessarily increase our damage. So remember, when you use Dimensional Assault, you teleport and strike. You can choose not to strike when you do this, as doing so would break your invisibility. But if you did, then during that strike, the enemy would be flat-footed to you even if they weren't otherwise, due to being invisible, right? We get another skill feat at this level. Go ahead and pick your favorite. And then as for our Wizard archetype feat, I want to take Advanced Arcana, which would let us take a higher level Wizard feat here, right? At this point, it would be a level 4 Wizard feat. And I want to take Enhanced Familiar. This is just going to give more abilities to your familiar, letting it fly or heal you or give you an additional spell slot, which is probably what I would pick. Nothing that's necessarily going to increase our damage directly, but lots of cool options to help us out, no question. All right. For our final level 10 damage report here, since we last checked, we have bumped our strength modifier by 1. Our cantrips have continued to scale up nicely. We've gained another +1 to hit thanks to the automatic bonus progression chart. We've gained +2 to damage with our weapons thanks to weapon specialization, and another +2 to damage from Arcane Cascade, a +1d6 of damage from Runic Impression, right? And a ton of utility, defense, and area of effect options thanks to our spells and other feats and features. And thus, at this level, against low enemy ACs, which would be a 27 here, we would on average do 65 damage per round, and against a high enemy AC, which is a 30, it would be 47 DPR. And that is actually significantly lower than the Thief, who, when I took to level 10, by the way, gave them the Precise Debilitations Rogue feat, which was a significant increase to their DPR. I never took the Ninja past level 6, but I have a feeling that they would probably be outpacing our Magus here as well. So let's discuss our feelings about being so outperformed here by a mere rogue in the final thoughts. All right, I will admit, the damage numbers for our magical Panzer ended up being a little bit lower than I expected. Maybe significantly lower once we got to level 10. Yeah, I was kind of hoping that they'd be leading the DPR spreadsheets when all was said and done, because I want my Gish to be the best at everything ever. But, you know, maybe we need to take a step back and gain a little perspective. I think those of us coming from the D&D world have gotten used to the idea of casters being just better at basically everything when compared to non-caster classes, right? Even when it comes to single target damage, depending on how you build them anyway, I feel like my 129 D&D character builds have tended to show that, maybe with a few exceptions. And maybe, just maybe, that's not great game design. I mean, let's think about it. This character that we've built can throw out fireballs. They can slow, snare, sleep, and dazzle. They can bend the very fabric of reality to teleport, banish, throw up walls of stone and ice, and when necessary, deal big damage to lots of enemies all over the battlefield. In addition, they can hit like a truck on a single target once in a while and do really respectable sustained single target damage to boot. Maybe, just maybe, a character who can do everything shouldn't necessarily be able to do everything as well as or better than every other character. Because if that were the case, it would make it hard to justify ever playing any other kind of character, right? Maybe that's why I've done so many Bladesinger builds to date. So yes, while a part of me really wishes that this Pathfinder spellsword could be totally OP, the bigger part of me really appreciates that they pay a small price on the spreadsheets for all of the power and versatility being a true spellsword offers. In the end, I would gladly sacrifice a little bit of damage for all the magical awesomeness that this Magus can bring to the table. I know it would be an absolute riot to play in-game, and I'm really excited to be experiencing that right now in my own campaign. So, at the end of the day, here's to balance. That is the build for the week. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. More than that, I hope you know how much I love you, because I do. Thank you so much for all that you do for me, for the channel. I really, truly appreciate it. I hope you have a fantastic day and a really great week, and that you stay safe and be good and be kind, and that I see you again really soon. But until then, take care. Bye. The Dungeon Dudes are my favorite dudes. You, too, can buy this shirt. Just look in, like, the video description of any one of their videos. They have a link to their merch shop. I'm the kid who always looked out the window, failing the test in geography. But I've seen things far beyond just this schoolyard, distant shores of exotic lands. There's the spires of the Turkish Empire, 6 months since we made landfall. Riding low with the spices of India, through Gibraltar we're rich men all. There may not be a more, like, this is the mind of a D&D player song that's not about D&D than The Kid by David Wilcox. It's actually by Buddy Mondlock. David Wilcox did a cover of it. Anyway, both like folk singers, but gorgeous song. Check it out on, like, look it up on YouTube or something. David Wilcox, The Kid. When that background is too lit, I feel like it's more focused than I am. Right here. Yeah, there. Yeah, yes. Yeah. Ooh, oh. Okay, stay. Stay. Why don't you want to stay? Focus on my arms, not on Shepard. I know Shepard is amazing. I would like to focus on her too. Sustained, not sustained. persistent. Wait a minute, I already took society. I have an extra skill I didn't account for. Don't say that. No, don't say that. Don't say that. I think I need to recrunch some numbers. Uh-oh. I went to lunch, and I came back, and the sun has moved, and it is just shining right on my face. And the shades that I have in my office here are like sunshades, so they're only like partially opaque. Well, I'm just gonna have a really shiny half a face for the rest of the video. There's this big massive cloud that's just right next to the sun. Okay, come on. Yeah, there you go. It's a little better.